Hello and welcome back to our channel. In this video, we'll continue our Postman video series and we'll be talking about variables in Postman. So let's begin. So what are variables? A variable is a symbolic representation of data that enables you to access a value without having to enter it manually wherever you need it. Now, this can be useful if you're using the same values in multiple places. Variables make your request more flexible, readable, and by extracting the detail away. For example, like if you have the same URL, like if you have a collection and you have multiple, like say hundreds of individual requests in your collection, right? Or you have multiple collections. In all of them, you are using the same URL. So in that case, it'll be more useful for you if you can use a variable, like for example, like a base URL, and you create a variable called base URL, and then store the actual URL's value against that base URL. So how does that help? So if later on, if the URL changes, all you have to do is instead of changing each and every request in your collection, you just have to change the base URL value to the updated value, and then all the requests will automatically updated with that information. The same principle applies to any part of your request where data is repeated. And also we can use the same thing for your response body elements as well, which we can, in case you're using for chaining reaction, meaning like you're capturing a response, and in that response you're capturing a value which you want to use for the next request. In those instances also you can capture that element as a variable and pass it on in your next request. Now, so using variables. So variables enable you to store and reuse values in Postman. Like like the example we discussed above, wherein you're using a variable called base URL, and you store that actual URL value against the against a variable called base URL, and then you can reference that variable throughout your collections. You can reference it throughout your environments and throughout your requests and throughout your test scripts. And this way, variables help you work efficiently and collaborate with other teammates, because you can share your environments and your variables, the globals, with your other team members, and they can use the same thing. So that's about how to use. And so what are different types of variables which we can use in Postman? So let's take a look at it. So we have different types of variables: local variable, a data variable, environment variables, collection variables, and global variables. So what are these? Let's take a look at each of them one by one. So a global variable is one which enables you to access data between your different collections, requests, test scripts, or environments. Global variables are available throughout a workspace. Since global variables have a broader scope available in Postman, they are well suited for testing and prototyping. Okay, so what does that mean? So your global variables, you can use this in your collections, in your environments, in your data. So this can be used across different collections and different environments. Once it's set, it can be used in all this in your individual requests or your environments or collections. It has a broader scope. So once you set a global variable, it can be referenced in different in your different collections or environments. You can just reference the same variable and pass it in and set it in your different files. So what is a collection variable? So a collection variable, again, so this can be used throughout the request in a collection. So if you have setting a variable in a, or defining a variable in a collection, that variable can be used and referenced within all the requests within that collection. And it is independent of environments. Like if you're pointing different environments, that variable still will be valid and can be referenced. And okay, so the third one is environment variables. So environment variables enable you to scope your work to different environments. For example, typical projects, you might have like a QA environment, a dev environment, a UAT environment, a production environment. So you can create variables for different environments, and then you can just reference to different environment variables for different environments in your request. And that way, you can point to a dev environment, you can point to a QA environment, you can point to a production environment, or you can point to or like a UAT environment by using the environment variables. Then comes the data variables. So data variables are actually they come from external CSV or JSON files. With that to define data sets that you use using your running your collections with the Newman or collection runner and Postman. Data variables have current values which don't persist beyond requests or collection runs. Basically, that data values will be it will be persist only throughout the collection runs. It will not persist beyond that. Whereas environment and global collection they persist beyond that, and they you can be referenced again and again. A local variable is a temporary variable that is accessed in your request. This is the narrow scope. That is, this is only valid for a particular request where you are setting it, and then this value will be used when you're running that particular request, and it doesn't get persisted. So for that run, for that thing, for that particular run, that variable is used, and it will not be stored. But but the other variables, it will be stored throughout your collection run, and so if you set a variable it will be valid for all the requests in your collections for throughout the run. But as a local variable will be persist only for one particular request in that run. That is the different scope. Now we've seen different types of variable, and here we have all these types again. But what happens if suppose I set a local variable with name, say base URL, right? And then again I set an environmental variable also with the name base URL. What will happen then? So in that case, the one with the narrow scope, like we have here, right? So within Postman, we have global, collection, environment, and data and local variables. These are also global variables is the biggest scope. Collection is next to it. Environment is less than collection. Data is less than environment, and local variables is narrow scope. So which one will override which one? So local variable will override global variable, because you are trying to override for that particular request, and that so a global variable, if you don't provide anything, the global variable will value whatever value you are storing global variable will be passed through. But if you're giving on top of it, if you're giving a local variable, so it is like you're overriding with a specific local example. So that will take precedence. So from this diagram, we can say the one with the narrow scope will override the other one. So you can see the local variable will override data, and local variable also override environment. So it will override all of them because it's specific to that particular request. But similarly, this will override an environment, and environment will override a global variable. As far as the impact is concerned, right? So that's how that's how the hierarchy works as far as the variables. Which one be, if they all have the same name, which one will take precedence? So that's how it is. It's a reverse of this. So it'll go from in to outside, right? So if all of them are the same name, this will be applied, which is the local variable. Okay, so now next question, how to set those variables. So how to set a variable in your Postman. So let's go to Postman here. Now, for example, here I'm trying to set a variable. So I'm trying to set in a pre-request script. And why am I doing that? Because since it's a local variable, right, and it is not set, and I'm trying to run for this particular request, I'm trying to set a variable saying URL QA with this URL name. Now I'm setting is prerequisite because I want my request to understand that this URL QA means is referring to this URL. So we need to set this up before the request can be sent. So that's why I'm putting it in a pre-request. So once I put in pre-request, I'm defining a variable where URL QA, which has a value, this one. And now I'm passing. So and now let's send it, and then I'll explain what is happening. So if I send it, So you're getting a response back. So if you look deeper into what has happened is our request has before it could send it was looking for any pre-request script. It came here, it saw that there's a variable is being set as URL QA and has a value of this value, and then I'm passing that as a URL in my request, and so this replace this variable value with this URL and then send it. Well, we set it as a pre-request. Now this is for a local variable, right? And we're setting it before the request can be sent. Now if you want to do the same thing, now if I do here, right? Now this is my collection, and what I've done here is the same request I've copy pasted and put it here. So it is also like if I send this, I'll get the same response as we got for the previous one. So it's the same response, it's the same URL which I sent here as well, right? This is the URL I replace as a variable for request. So now since you may ask, okay, now I set as a variable here, will that work in the next request? So let's try that. So let me change this, copy that variable, take it over here, and I'm going to put the same variable here and see if it works. It will not work because it gives an error, address not found. Why? Because we had set this as a local variable, and it worked here because we set this as a pre-request script, and so it took this variable and was successful. When we came to the next request, we haven't defined what this variable is, right? So this request has no information what this variable is. So one way is again we set here, but then that defeats the purpose. If you have to go and set for each request what is the prerequisite, then that doesn't make sense, right? So that's why we go for a global variable or an environmental or collection variable. So how do we set that? So what we can do is we can set a global variable. We got pm dot globals dot set. Now before that, so in this collection, if you take a look, there is no variables set here yet, and there's no, and if you look at the environment, there's no global variable set. Nothing is set yet. Now what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to set a global variable here. If I let me just make sure that, yeah, so globals are set. Yeah, it's the same thing. Okay, so now let me run this and then we'll see what happens. So now I'm trying to set a global variable URL QA, and with the value of the let me just change this. So let me remove this so that I can show you other examples. So let me do this, right? So okay, make sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking the base URL and set the base URL as URL QA, and then the endpoint I've just kept it separate. So URL QA will refer to this value, which is from HTTPS to all the way here, and then slash entries is the endpoint or the complete endpoint. So now when I do that, let's see what happens. So you're getting a response back, and then now if you go to collections, right, go to your environment, and there you go. So you see this under your globals, your URL QA has been set to this value, the value which we set here. Now once it's set to a global value, now what you can do is go to the next request in your collection, and then now if you give this, like, so now we get this entries, right? Remember earlier when we gave, it didn't work because only this worked and this didn't work because you couldn't find what URL QA was. So now that we have set a global variable as URL QA, and now if we pass this variable here, let's see what happens. So now it should work. So now it took it because now it can recognize what this variable is, because our global variable, there's a global variable which is set as URL QA. So when you pass in your collection a URL QA, it's going to do a lookup and see if there is any variable set, any global variable set, or a collection variable set, or an environment variable set, with that variable name. And then once it goes here, and it's going to take a do a lookup, and yeah, it says URL QA refers to this value. Now, now what? Okay, so just give an example. Why we want to use a variables is now if you are using this, and now I can pass this in all the requests here, right? I can pass this here. This is easy for me. So now I'll replace all the URLs with a variable, a global variable, like this, right? Pass this. So in your collection, when you're running a test, when you're testing APIs or you're doing a dev work, you have multiple, like thousands of APIs or hundreds of APIs. It's easier to maintain with a variable because now having this set now also, so we have to make any change to a URL. So suppose this is now suppose this is URL QA, right? Now this is suppose you're testing a dev environment or you're testing a production environment. So if you don't have a variable set, what you would be doing is you'll go individually and then change the URL to point to the your production environment or in your UAT environment. But the advantage here is now since you said URL QA as in your global, suppose there's a change in your URL, all you have to do is make the edit here, right? You just change here, then all the collection, all your requests in the collection will automatically update it. So you don't have to individually go and change the URL. You just change at the one place where the global is set, and then automatically all the requests will take that update and run accordingly. Now let's try that. So I'm going to give an invalid. It's going to do a. I'm going to update the URL and say _1, and we know this URL doesn't exist, so it's going to fail. But let's just to prove that how all the how this update is taken by all the requests. I'm just trying to save it. So I'm doing this. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to save all the requests as well. So let me save that. Let me say close. Okay, let me do this. Close all but selected tab. Save changes. So we are trying to save our changes now. So now, so what we have changed URL QA to this, right? And we have passed URL QA in all our requests. So now what happens is now if we send this, if we run this collection, right? If we run this collection, everything is going to fail because the URL doesn't exist. If you look at the results, the error occurred, and Postman is not going to run further because it's going to give an error because the URL was changed. Now so now that you said that, now if you go back to your environment, now you have to fix it. Now in a general case, if you're not given this variable, you would have to go to each and every request and change wherever that URL is passed. You would have changed. But now because you're using a global variable here, all you have to do is come back to globals, edit it, and fix the value, and then save it. And then now if you run the collection again, all of them is going to pass. There you go. So this is a good example of why we want to use variables, and because variables, wherever you have a property which is being reused throughout your collection, it's very useful to use variables so that it saves you a lot of efforts, and also your chances of making more errors will be limited because all you have to do is change at one place instead of changing in hundreds of places. So that's a good example. Similarly, there are other variables, as I mentioned, like environment variables and local variables. Similarly, how we can set is like you can just go back, like how we set here pm.global set. Similarly, for environment, you will say pm.environment.set. I'll set an environment. So let me change it. So one, you send this or save it actually. Send it. Okay. So basically now if you go back to your environment, you will see, we haven't set an environment here. So once we set an environment, new environment, and then you send here name, let's say demo environment, right, and save it. Okay, and then you pick it. Sorry. Yeah, I need to add a new environment. See a new environment. So now initial value. Now let's go back to your collection. So now if you set this, if you save this, send this, and now demo environment, if you go here, you see this is set now. So wherever in this environment, wherever you want to use URL QA1 is going to point to this URL. So that's how you can set different variables for different purposes. Like if you have a global, it can be used across collections, across different collections, and across different environments. The same global environment can be used. So in this example, URL QA can be used by all of these collections. URL QA1 will be used only in this environment. Wherever this environment has been called, only there URL QA1 be used. Similarly, the local and variable which we use, that can be used only for a particular request. So these are the different examples of how variables can be used in Postman. There are a couple more additional types of secure, like default and security types. We will discuss those in further videos going forward. Thanks guys for listening to this video. Hopefully it's useful to you, and if you like it, do like and subscribe the channel. Thanks.